Her heart is a wellspring of compassion, never running dry. Such a phrase captures something fundamental about the nature of being human. Compassion, when it is genuine and unrelenting, is not simply an admirable trait. It is the very fabric of our humanity, the thread that holds our fragile connections to one another in place. In a world fraught with division, misunderstanding, and self-interest, the wellspring of compassion is a rarity, yet it is also an infinite reservoir. Replenished, not by external sources, but by an intrinsic alignment with purpose and meaning. Think about this for a moment. Compassion is not weakness. It is not mere sentimentality. It is strength wrapped in tenderness. To care deeply about others in a way that seeks no reward, this requires courage. It demands vulnerability. For when you open your heart to another's pain, you risk being hurt yourself. And yet, to choose compassion is to align yourself with something eternal. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke once said, for one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all our tasks, the work for which all other work is but preparation. Compassion is the labor of the heart, unending and immeasurably rewarding. Have you ever paused to reflect on the moments in your life when compassion transformed you? Perhaps it was the unexpected kindness of a stranger or a friend's unwavering presence during your darkest hour. These are the moments that define us. They remind us that, despite the chaos of life, there exists a deep and abiding truth. There exists a deep and abiding truth. We are not meant to walk this journey alone. The wellspring of compassion is what bridges the gap between isolation and connection, between despair and hope. But compassion is not passive. It is active, dynamic, and often requires sacrifice. It is not simply feeling for someone else. It is stepping into their world and choosing to carry a piece of their burden. It is, as Dostoevsky wrote, to love someone means to see them as God intended them to be, to see past the flaws, the failures, the brokenness, and to recognize the divine spark within every soul. This is no small task. It requires a heart that is willing to be stretched, broken, and remade over and over again. And here's the paradox. The more compassion you give, the more your heart expands. It is like a wellspring that grows deeper and more abundant with every act of kindness. You may think that if you pour yourself out for others, you will be left empty, drained. But the truth is the opposite. The more you give, the more you receive, not in material terms, but in the richness of spirit, the depth of your humanity. There is a joy in selflessness that cannot be replicated by any other means. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of unimaginable suffering, once said, "For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue," as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. It's easy to talk about compassion in the abstract, but what does it look like in practice? It looks like showing up when it's inconvenient, listening when you'd rather speak, and forgiving when it feels impossible. It looks like choosing to love when it would be easier to walk away. Compassion doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always seem fair, but it is always worth it. For in those moments when you act out of pure compassion, you are participating in something sacred. You are stepping into a story that is larger than yourself, a story that has been unfolding since the beginning of time. Yet in our modern world, compassion is often mistaken for weakness. We celebrate power, ambition, and self-reliance, and we forget that true greatness lies not in what we take, but in what we give. A heart full of compassion is a fortress, not a vulnerability. It is a source of strength that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. It is the kind of strength that whispers, "Even in my pain, I will care for others. Even in my fear, I will extend a hand. Even in my uncertainty, I will love." There is something deeply liberating about living this way. When you let go of the need to protect yourself, to hoard your emotional resources, you discover a freedom that is unparalleled. You realize that compassion is not a limited commodity. It is infinite. It flows not from the finite reserves of your own energy, but from a wellspring that is constantly replenished by purpose, by meaning, and by the profound interconnectedness of all life. This is why people who live lives of great compassion often seem to have an unshakable joy, even in the face of great suffering. They have tapped into something eternal. But let's not romanticize compassion to the point where we ignore its challenges. To live with a heart wide open is to invite pain. When you care deeply, you will hurt deeply. There is no avoiding this. Yet, as C.C. Lewis wisely observed, love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to compassion is isolation, and isolation is a prison. It may feel safe, but it is a safety that comes at the cost of your soul. To close yourself off from others is to close yourself off from the very essence of life. It is to deny the wellspring within you, to let it dry up from neglect. And what a tragedy that would be, for the world is desperately in need of people whose hearts are overflowing with compassion. So how do you begin to cultivate this wellspring within yourself? Start small. Look for opportunities to show kindness in the ordinary moments of life. Listen without judgment. Offer a word of encouragement. Choose forgiveness over resentment. These acts may seem insignificant, but they are not. Each one is a drop in the well, a ripple that expands outward, touching lives in ways you may never fully understand. Remember, too, that compassion is not just for others, it is for yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Take the time to nurture your own heart, to heal your own wounds, so that you can give from a place of wholeness. Self-compassion is not selfish. It is essential. It is what allows you to keep the wellspring flowing, even in the face of life's inevitable challenges. In the end, the wellspring of compassion is not just a gift you give to others. It is a gift you give to yourself. For to live with a heart full of compassion is to live a life of meaning, purpose, and profound connection. It is to be fully alive, and that, perhaps, is the greatest gift of all. A compassionate heart is never empty. It overflows. It overflows with love, with understanding, with a willingness to shoulder the burdens of others. It's willingness to shoulder the burdens of others, and the willingness to shoulder the burdens of others. The world often tells us otherwise. It tells us to focus on our own needs, to prioritize self-preservation, to guard our hearts against the vulnerability that compassion demands. But the truth is, the more we give of ourselves, the more we find that there is no limit to what we have to offer. Compassion is not a finite resource. It is a wellspring that deepens with every act of kindness, every gesture of love, every moment we choose to see another person, not as a competitor, but as a fellow traveler in this vast, unpredictable journey of life. There is a profound strength in choosing compassion, a strength that is often misunderstood. In a culture that equates power with dominance and success with self-interest, the idea of opening yourself up to the needs of others can seem counterintuitive. But true strength is not found in building walls around your heart to keep others out. True strength is found in the courage to break down those walls, to allow yourself to feel deeply, to care deeply, even when it hurts. As the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said, to love is to commit oneself without guarantee, to give oneself completely in the hope that our love will produce love in the loved person. Love is an act of faith, and whoever is of little faith is also of little love. Compassion is faith in action. It is the belief that no matter how broken the world may seem, our efforts to care for one another matter. It is the conviction that even the smallest act of kindness can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never see or understand. And it is in these moments, these acts of quiet generosity, that we discover the true purpose of our existence. For what is life if not an opportunity to connect, to uplift, to remind one another of the beauty and the dignity of being human? But compassion is not always easy. It asks much of us. It asks us to look beyond ourselves, to see the struggles of others, even when our own hearts feel heavy. It asks us to step into the pain of another, to bear witness to their suffering, and to offer whatever comfort we can. And in doing so, it asks us to confront our own fears, our own insecurities, our own vulnerabilities. This is not a path for the faint of heart. It is a path that requires resilience, determination, and above all, a deep and abiding belief in the power of love. The beauty of compassion is that it is not diminished by adversity. It is strengthened by it. When life knocks you down, when the world feels cold and unkind, it is easy to retreat into yourself, to close off your heart in an attempt to protect it. But it is in these moments when compassion feels most difficult that it is most needed. For it is in choosing to give, even when you feel you have nothing left, that you discover the boundless nature of your own capacity to love. As Khalil Gibran wrote, your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Consider this: every act of compassion is a seed. It may be small, it may seem insignificant, but it has the potential to grow into something extraordinary. A kind word, a listening ear, a helping hand, these are the things that can change the course of a life. And not just for the person receiving them, but for the person giving them as well. For in giving, we find meaning. In giving, we find purpose. In giving, we become more fully ourselves. The power of compassion lies in its ability to transform. It transforms relationships, turning strangers into friends, adversaries into allies. It transforms communities, creating spaces of trust and mutual support. And it transforms individuals, helping us to see the world and our place in it with greater clarity and humility. Compassion challenges us to rise above our own limitations, to become better, stronger, more loving versions of ourselves. And in doing so, it reminds us that we are not alone, that we are part of something greater, something beautiful, something sacred. But let us not mistake compassion for naivety. To be compassionate is not to turn a blind eye to injustice, to excuse wrongdoing, or to accept suffering as inevitable. True compassion is rooted in truth. It sees the world as it is, in all its complexity and imperfection, and chooses to act anyway. It is the willingness to confront hard realities, to stand up for what is right, to fight for the dignity and worth of every person. This is not a passive virtue, it is a call to action. As the activist and theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, we are not simply to bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice. We are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. And so the question becomes, how do we cultivate this overflowing compassion within ourselves? How do we ensure that our hearts remain open, even in the face of pain and hardship? The answer lies in practice. Compassion, like any other virtue, must be nurtured. It begins with small, deliberate acts of kindness. It grows through moments of empathy when we take the time to truly understand the experiences of others. And it is sustained by gratitude, by recognizing the blessings in our own lives and choosing to share them with those in need. There is a quiet power in living this way. When you choose compassion, you align yourself with something eternal. You become part of a story that is larger than yourself, a story that is written not in words, but in actions. You become a source of light in a world that can sometimes feel dark, a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, there is hope. And in doing so, you inspire others to do the same. For compassion is contagious. It spreads from one heart to another, creating ripples of goodness that extend far beyond what we can see. In the end, to live with an overflowing heart is to live fully. It is to embrace the joys and the sorrows of life with equal grace, to find meaning in both the giving and the receiving of love. It is to recognize that our greatest strength lies not in what we have, but in what we give. And it is to understand that, in the words of Maya Angelou, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So let us choose compassion, not because it is easy, but because it is right. Let us choose it not because it guarantees us happiness, but because it brings us meaning. And let us choose it not just for the sake of others, but for the sake of ourselves. For in the end, a compassionate heart is not just a gift to the world, it is a gift to the one who holds it. And it is a gift that will never run dry.